Now, as our next proud owner presents his wonderfully restored Vauxhall J-Type, it may be difficult, initially, to see much difference between this model and the previous two Vauxhalls we've seen on parade. This is because, although his J-Type, dating back to 1948, is most definitely in the post-war category, it owes its design and styling to both the Vauxhall 14 and the Vauxhall 10 of the pre-war era. It's important to remember that we're dealing with the period of history immediately prior to the Second World War and directly after, so black would, without question, have been the most common colour used in British car manufacturing, regardless of make or model. When the war finally came to an end in 1945, the British car industry had to pick up where it had left off 6 years earlier. Also, drivers were still strictly rationed with petrol coupons right up until 1950, and the government decreed that the majority of cars to come off the newly reopened production lines, including Vauxhalls from Luton, were exported to improve the country's bank balance. There was no room for design, innovation or anything fancy, and for Vauxhall, modification of the 10 and 14 models proved to be their starting point. Eventually, the government changed car taxation from a horsepower-related system to a flat-rate system, and the classic Vauxhall 10 could logically be upgraded with a more powerful engine. Firstly, the H-Type with its 12 horsepower took over from the 10, and then came the J-Type, which you see here today. This particular model is one of the last, having been manufactured in 1948, the final year of the J-Type's production. The don't ride, glide principle still held true, and with minor modifications rather than design innovations, the J-Type offered a number of improvements. Already enjoying the benefits of light handling thanks to the integral body construction, the addition of the extra horsepower with the 1781cc six-cylinder engine gave the J-Type an extra edge. In fact, the J-Type is often called the Vauxhall J146 as a direct result of the configuration. For the discerning driver, other modifications included the luxury of an adjustable steering column, adjustable footrests, and double-action shock absorbers. And all this was available for the competitive price of £220. Between 1938 and 1948, 30,511 Vauxhall J-Types were produced, and had any of the original owners kept one of these classic cars, they would be delighted at what their investment would net them today. Collecting classic cars can be an absolute joy, and the car you see here being put through its paces has brought great pleasure to its owner. Unusually, when the car was purchased 5 years ago, most of the original bodywork was intact, with only a small amount of rust. The majority of cars of this type have required extensive restoration, and few with as many original features as this model actually exist. This is most definitely reflected in the value of the car, as this owner has at least doubled his investment in a very short space of time. However, as you can see for yourself, this is a mere technicality. This has been a question of finding an old, forgotten treasure and lovingly bringing it back to life. The joy of saving a classic car and the challenge of keeping it in the best possible condition is truly what it's all about. It's very gratifying for this owner to know the monetary value of this vehicle, but it's been a labour of love, and parting him from his car would be no easy task. It's also interesting to ask classic car owners for their top tips, and in this case it was concerning that dreaded scourge of the motorist of any era: rust. With this J-Type, life was made a lot easier, because there was minimal rust damage, and prevention is always better than cure. OK, if you're happy to take on a complete restoration project, that's fine. But if you're taking your first steps towards classic car collecting, you might be glad of a few tips on how to spot potential rust problems before you buy. It's always worth getting to know other classic car owners. They're a friendly lot and better than any manual or encyclopedia. Many classics have specific problem rusting areas due to design factors, and fellow enthusiasts will point you in the right direction. But there are some useful general pointers that the owner of this beautiful J-Type has suggested. Front wings always need careful scrutiny when it comes to rust. Likewise, the areas immediately around the headlamps. Always watch out for seals leaking around the windscreen, because this will cause extensive corrosion. Doors are a little easier to cope with, as they can be replaced if the model you've chosen isn't too obscure, but do check that the door frames are okay. Always be wary of a seller who won't let you give a suspect area a gentle prod. And make sure you lift the carpet in the boot to check the floor and the rear wheel arches. If you're in any doubt, walk away and wait until you can find the soundest rust-free option. This wonderful J-Type is a perfect example of what can be achieved with a good purchase in the first place. So take your time and be realistic about your restoration abilities.